Turn in your Bibles, if you will, to Luke chapter 10. Luke chapter 10, verses 25 through 37. Luke chapter 10, 25 through 37. I'd like to do the scripture reading, and then we'll consider from this passage. Loving your neighbor. Luke chapter 10, verses 25 through 37. I will be reading from the English Standard Version, the ESV. Luke 10, 25 through 37. And behold, a lawyer stood up and put him to the test, saying, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit life? He said to him, What is written in the law? How do you read it? And he answered, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And he said to him, You have answered correctly. Do this, and you will live. But he, desiring to justify himself, said to Jesus, And who is my neighbor? Jesus replied, A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers, who stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a priest was going down the road, and when he saw him, he pressed on by the other side. So likewise, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. He went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he set him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. And the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I come back. Which of these 3 do you think proved to be his neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? And he said, The one who showed him mercy. And Jesus said to him, You go and do likewise. We are living right now in a time period where in many places at different times, there's not a whole lot of love being shown, aren't we? We see a lot of things going on where I don't care what the reason is, it doesn't matter. There's a lot of love not being shown. Love not according to any man's standard, but love according to God's standard. And the idea that's being shown here, remember what the question was, the question that Jesus asked the man. And by the way, the man, Jesus says, he gave a great answer. When you love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and when you love your neighbor as yourself, notice what Jesus said. He said, You do these, and you will do well. And understand something, in another place, Jesus tells us all the law and the prophets hang upon those 2 commandments. Those are the greatest 2 commandments. And so that's why Jesus was able to say, you do these, you do those 2 things. He doesn't have to mention the Sabbath day. He doesn't have to mention not committing adultery. He doesn't have to mention honoring your mother and your father. He doesn't have to mention any of those other things, because all those other things will be done when one has the proper love for God and for his neighbor. Okay, that's what I want us to study tonight. I want us to study exactly within the context here, and obviously I can't cover everything there is to cover, but I want us to notice within this text what should be going through each and every one of our minds when it comes to loving our neighbor, and in the text, what shouldn't be going through anyone's minds when they're meeting someone on the road, or when they're considering how to react to someone on the internet, or when they're doing anything, if they're not doing it in love, how they shouldn't react. Again, there's no possible way to cover every certain thing. So all I want to do is cover 3 different aspects of what we see within the text here. Okay. First aspect, first thing I want us to consider. I've only got 3 points. And for each one of these 3 points, I was able to find examples in God's word about how that's done, about how that's done or what's involved in doing it. All right. And so that's what I'm wanting to note tonight. 3, every one of them. I had no difficulty at all coming up with boom, 3, boom, 3, boom, 3. You know how preachers like 3. All right. Got to have 3 points. You got to have 3 subpoints. All right. So it made me comfortable in making my lesson tonight. But I want you to notice what's involved with each one of these subpoints that I'm going to have. Okay. First off, this idea of love him as yourself. Understand what the text here tells us that this man was trying to do. I love the fact that God can get into the mind of the people who's speaking to Jesus Christ. By the way, what we see in John chapter 2, Jesus knows what's inside a man. Jesus knew exactly why this man was asking, at least exactly what he was trying to do. Did you notice that when it says there, first off, it says he was testing Jesus. All right, again, this is one of those times they were trying to test him, see if he really was the real McCoy, see if he really was, see if they could trip him up. Perhaps. I don't know whether he was trying to trick. He gives the answer or has him. By the way, I love that too. This guy is a lawyer. Please understand when that says lawyer, it doesn't mean an attorney. Someone who's going to go to court for you. When he says lawyer, he's someone who knows the law. And he does know the law. He gives the right answer. He gives the 2 greatest commandments. Love the Lord your God and love your neighbor. Okay, the 2 great commandments there. And Jesus, as I said earlier, made it clear. You do those and you'll do right. But look at what the man says, and trying to justify himself there in verse 29. See, this man was wanting to find out, okay? He knew the answer, love. That was the answer. And when it comes to loving his neighbor, he wanted to be able to specifically pick out who it was who he was going to love. And you're going to see that in a little bit. In fact, no, I'm going to look at it first. Go all the way to the end of the thing. And look at how he answers Jesus. When we get to the end, there's 3 men who come across this individual who was beaten. 2 of them were Jews, and 1 of them was a Samaritan. When Jesus asked him who was being the neighbor, notice the man's answer. He doesn't say the Samaritan. He won't even let those words come out of his mouth. Instead, what he says is the one who helped him. All right? The one who aided him. He is the one who showed him mercy. He was his neighbor. By the way, did you also know notice how Jesus turned that around? The man was wanting to know who's my neighbor. Okay, you and I use that word neighbor for someone who lives next door to us, across the street, or maybe even in the same subdivision. That's my neighbor. These 2 people we're going to be seeing here in a little bit. We're not even of the same nationality, or certainly did not live in the same place. Okay, well, like I said, we're going to see that in a few moments. But the idea of who is your neighbor is who is the one that you are able to help, or who are you being a neighbor to? Is who are you being helpful towards? Okay, that's how God sees our neighbors. Because the old law, and remember, Jesus and this man were living under the old law at this time. And so when the old law said that, love your neighbor, would never come right out and said who your neighbor was. Well, Jesus gave God's definition of who's your neighbor. Who is the one that you're able to help? And by the way, who should Christians be helping? Anyone in need. To the best of our ability. We got billions of people on this planet, and so obviously we're not always able to help each and every individual. But everyone that we are able to help, though that individual is our neighbor, and that individual is who we're being neighborly towards. Okay? And so you need to love as you love yourself. Now, this idea, remember, the man was trying to justify himself. Who do I have to help? And Jesus basically turns it back on him. He says, you need to love as you love yourself. Well, what does that mean? Go with me, if you will, first to Matthew chapter 5. We're going to look at a couple different passages, and these are going to give us the idea of what it means to love your neighbor as yourself. As I said, this particular concept is a very good, used thought within the Bible. Matthew chapter 5, 7 through 12. This is during the Sermon on the Mount. And listen to what Jesus says. You know these first two verses because I like to quote them all the time. Ask and it will be given to you, seeking you will find, knocking the door will be open to you. Now, let's look for the reason that Jesus Christ said those words. Look at the context, starting there in verse 7. Matthew 5, that's not right. Matthew 7, verse 7. I'm sorry, I got that wrong on my, or do I? No, Matthew 5, 7 would be in the, yeah, that's Matthew 7, 7. Sorry. Got my chapter number wrong. Matthew 7, 7. Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and the one who asks, who knocks, it will be open to him. Now, next thing he does is explain why that's going to happen. Look at why, if you ask or seek or knock, it'll be given to you. This is why. Look at the very next verse, verse 9. Or which of you, if his son asks him for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a serpent? If you then, who are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father who is in heaven give good things to you, to those who ask him? Here's the reason that you will receive if you ask. If it will be open to you if you knock. Here's the reason, because God wants you to have good things. That clear. Because God is your Father, and he wants you to have what you need. He wants you to have what's going to help you in your life on this earth, just like parents with their children. Now, my Bible has a little title over the very next verse, which almost, and a little space, which almost makes it look like Jesus is changing subjects. Well, he's not changing subjects. Look at the very next verse following that. How God knows how to take care of those who need help. Verse 12. So, see that word so? This is how I know he's building off what he just said. What I just said about how God knows how to take care of those who need something, who are his children. So, whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them. For this is the law and the prophets. Wait a minute, I thought loving the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself was the law and the prophets. Yes, you notice that Jesus just connected those two? He's connecting it a lot with the second greatest commandment. Love your neighbor as yourself. Whatever you would have others do unto you, do unto them. Love your neighbor as yourself. See, this is the concept that this man was trying to justify himself, try to find out just how much he can get away with. And Jesus made it clear exactly how much he can get away with. He can get away with helping all those who need help, and he doesn't have to help those who don't need help. That's how much you can get away with. If someone doesn't need help, then you don't need to help them. But if someone is in need of your help and you are capable of helping them, never want to say, because there's a whole world that needs help. We can only help those we are capable of helping. And sometimes it seems overwhelming. But the plain fact of the matter is this question. Think about what this man who had been beaten by those robbers in Jesus's parable, this man who had been beaten on it by robbers, who was left alone in the middle of the wilderness, if he was waking up, what was he probably calling out? Help me. Someone, help me. A Levite goes by. A priest goes by. A Samaritan stops to help. And so at the very end, when Jesus says, who was this man's neighbor? Who was the one who helped him? Who was the one who was doing another? That Levite would have been crying out. We don't have to, that's a rhetorical question. We know exactly what would have been happening. Whether or not this man was conscious enough to be able to cry out, Again, this is Jesus's parable. But whether or not, whatever the situation is, he needed help. And the ones who should have realized how they would have felt in his place should have stopped and helped him. Next verse, Ephesians chapter 5. Ephesians 5, 28 through 29. Ephesians 5, 28 through 29. Now, this is going to look, when you get there, you're going to look at that and say, wait a minute, we're talking about husbands and wives here. Yes, we are. Reason I picked this particular passage out is because Jesus Christ uses those words, as you love yourself. And so a good place to go to find out what's meant by as you love yourself is another place where Jesus says to do something as you love yourself. And here he's talking to husbands and telling husbands how they're supposed to take care of their wives. Well, the way husbands are supposed to take care of their wives is exactly the way that everyone is supposed to take care of others, their neighbors, as you love yourself. Look at what it says in verses 28 and 29. In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church. Now, there's how it's done. Again, on the same concept as what we see in the same concept of as you would have them do unto you. Here he's saying, husbands, you need to be taking care of your wives as you would like yourself to be cared, as you would take care of yourself. You need to take care of your wives. And so once again, when Jesus says those words to that lawyer, when he was talking about what the second greatest commandment was, and he says, love your neighbor as yourself, you would take care of your neighbor as you would take care of yourself. If that Samaritan obviously had been beaten, left, and was able to get to an inn, he would pay for any way of helping him from his injuries. He would have made certain that the man who took care of him was paid to take care of himself, but he paid to take care of this injured man. Third point under this, Philippians 2, and he's telling the church in Philippi how they were supposed to react with each other. And this is a section where he's going to be talking to them about how to be humble like Jesus Christ is humble. But just before he gets there, he gives this idea of verse 4. In verse 4, he says, let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others. Another way of saying, do unto others as you would have them to do unto you. But this time he is saying to look outside ourselves. We all have our needs, our desires, our personal ways of being comfortable. Well, how is everyone else around you? How are their comfort levels? How are you or I concerned about the comfort of those that are around us? The idea for the Christian is not to live for himself, but obviously to live for God, but also to live for those who are around him. So again, love him as you love yourself. Second point, love him as your own. Okay. Did you notice, by the way, the two men that passed the man on the road? First off, let me say this before we talk about those two people. Where was this man going? Where? Jerusalem. So, what nationality was he? He was obviously a Jew. But by the way, there's two reasons why you would say obviously a Jew. If Jesus was telling a parable that was talking about a Gentile and not a Jew, he would have said a Gentile. But when he was talking to a Jew at that moment, and he says a man, he doesn't have to point out that the man was Jew. to a Jewish city. Obviously, now we're going to discuss that. Various people who would look at that and they would say, they weren't wanting to touch the man. The Samaritan was the man who was beaten on the road, was not of his own nationality. He was of a different race, but he was going to stop and help because this man was, not because this man was a Jew or a Samaritan, but because this man was someone who needed help. That's why he stopped and helped. I'm convinced if the man was a Samaritan, he would have stopped and helped. I'm convinced if the man was a Gentile, he would have stopped and helped. He stopped and helped the man who needed help. So love him as you love your own. Okay. First thing, go to Matthew chapter 5. This must be where this is where I got the idea of Matthew chapter 5. Go to Matthew chapter 5, verses 41 through 48. Jesus Christ taught this very concept on the Sermon on the Mount. Look at what it says in verses 41 through 48. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you. You have heard that it is said, you should love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he makes his sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and sends the rain on the just and the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? You therefore must be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. Now, consider, I started where I did on purpose. I started according to the Roman law of the day. A soldier within the Roman army who was on his way from point A to point B could demand anyone of the Jewish culture, of the Jewish, who were basically conquered people, could demand any conquered person by law to carry his pack for 1 mile. There's no question about who Jesus Christ is talking about. It was a common that it said, love your and hate your enemy. Where they heard it from was from their Jewishers who were teaching them who were teaching them exactly how you ought to feel about them. We know that in verse 57. 57 I want specifically. And if you greet only your brothers who? Jewish brothers. If you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? So Jesus Christ was trying to point out to them that this idea of greeting only your brothers, in other words, only your fellow Jews, is not loving your enemy. He's not making any bones about the fact that the Gentiles tended to be the enemies of the Jews. But Jesus Christ says this is not the way you are supposed to act towards those who persecute you. This is not the way that you're supposed to act towards people who treat you poorly, who have subjugated you. I know I can get that word out. But instead, what you are supposed to do is to love. Could someone turn the air down on that thing? I am sweating up here. I see someone else fanning themselves. It's right back there on the wall. I just need to do that little button down a couple. I think it goes up to, at 6 o'clock, it goes up to 78. I normally do that before I get started up here preaching on a Sunday night. And I didn't because I was rushing around trying to get my stuff together. Thank you very much, Chris. I am dying up here. So the idea of who is your neighbor and who you're supposed to love is, again, as we saw in the sermon on the parable of the Samaritan, the Good Samaritan, is whoever needs your help. But the attitude comes from the fact that we are supposed to be loving everyone anyway. Okay. Go to Luke chapter 9, 51 through 56. Luke chapter 9, 51 through 56. Notice what is said here on that same, the apostles showing their attitude towards Samaritans. Remember, it was a good Samaritan in Jesus's parable who helps out a Jew. Here's how Jews felt about the Samaritans. But what I want you to see is Jesus's reaction. When the days drew near for him to be taken up, he set his face to go to Jerusalem. And he sent messengers ahead of him who went and entered a village of the Samaritans to make preparations for him. But the people did not receive him. The Samaritans did not receive him because his face was set towards Jerusalem. This is showing a lot of the attitude between the Jews and the Samaritans. The Jews had treated the Samaritans like dogs, and the Samaritans weren't above reacting to the way they were treated. Now go on to what goes on. And when his disciples, James and John, saw it, they said, Lord, do you want us to tell fire to come down from heaven and consume them? I find this statement interesting. I was getting ready to say I love this statement, but I don't love this statement. I find this statement interesting because remember when Jesus walked on water, he showed his, or when Jesus was walking on water, but Peter showed his faith by saying to Jesus, Lord, if it is you, call me out on the water. Because Peter knew if Jesus called him out, he would be able to walk on water. He had that much faith in Jesus. Well, James and John are showing their faith in Jesus. If Jesus told them, yeah, call down fire and consume them, they knew for a fact that God was going to answer them calling that fire down on the Samaritans. Isn't it interesting that there are many times that Jesus Christ was not welcomed in Jewish towns, and you never see James and John asking if you want to call fire down upon those Jewish towns? Isn't that interesting? See, James and John did not mind calling down fire on Samaritans. They were only dogs anyway. They loved their own, but they did not love those of the other races. Jesus, this particular translation has Jesus turned and rebuked them. Some of the other translations add words that we're not certain whether they're actually in the text or not, but some of the manuscripts go on and says, you do not know what mind you are of. Their mind was not a godly mind. Their mind was one that was hateful towards other races. You say they love their own. They love their own family, Jews, their own race, Jews. But they did not love those of the other races. Okay. Third point, Acts chapter 10. Verse 34. Acts 10:34. This is where Peter shows his ignorance. You remember when Jesus, at the end of Matthew, tells the apostles they were to go into the world and make disciples of all nations? Do you realize what that word nations there means in Matthew chapter 28, verse 19, when he says make disciples of all nations? The word that's there for nations is The Greek word, you know this Greek word. The Greek word is ethnos. In other words, you're to go and make disciples of all ethnicities. Well, where had the people been going to up until this point? Here in Acts chapter 10, they had been going to the Jews. Oh, Philip went to the Samaritans, half Jews, but the Gentiles had not had the gospel taken to them. And it's estimated that this was 10 years after Jesus Christ died on the cross. 10 years since the church had been, definitely gets the point after God drops down a vision 3 times and gets him to think about it, and then gets told by this Gentile Cornelius that God had sent an angel to him, telling him to send for Peter to come and tell him the good news of Jesus Christ. And here's where Peter gets it in verse 34. And it shows the ignorance that Peter, the apostle, had. Look at what it says in verse 34 of chapter 10. So Peter opened his mouth and said, truly I understand. Finally get it, that God shows no partiality, but in every nation, anyone who fears him and does what is right is acceptable to him. When he gets back to Jerusalem in chapter 11, he runs into some Jews that had the same ignorant ideas that he did and has to tell them the whole story before they finally go in verse 18. Now we get it. God accepts everyone. If we are going to be children of God, we have to get that. God shows no partiality because of races. Christians cannot, children of God cannot show any partiality because of race. That is just ungodly, to put it bluntly. God doesn't show partiality. How can we think it's in God is light, in him is no darkness? How can we possibly ever think it's right for a Christian, for anyone, but especially for a child of God, to act differently towards someone because of their race? Isn't it a wonderful thing that this Samaritan did not allow his abuse, no doubt by Jews in the past, to cause him to treat the Jew the way perhaps that Jew would have treated him in the same situation? Wasn't that Jew blessed that he had a Samaritan that came along that was more godly, perhaps, than he was? We need to love everyone in this world as we love our own. As we love those who are like us, we need to love those who are not like us. Thirdly, don't throw songbooks at me for this statement. You're going to get what I mean by this in a moment. I understand the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God, and second to it is love your neighbor. But you'll see what I mean when I phrase it this way on my slide. Okay, so at the moment it might sound blasphemous, but I'm not meaning to be blasphemous. You'll see why I worded it that way. One of the reasons, by the way, a preacher does that is to get people's attention. So that's why you do it. But then you got to explain it so you don't get bad attention. All right. So I'm going to explain it. Okay. Don't give me the bad attention yet. Love him as you love your Lord. But how can I say that? First off, I don't want to go there yet. First off, in the parable, let's talk about why the priest and the Levite may very well have passed him. A person could make a very good argument that the priest is someone who needs to be able to take care of the needs of God's people. And so he could make a very good argument, a very good excuse. If I touch that bloodied man, I am not going to be able to serve in the temple, which is an honorable thing, a way to glorify God. So if I touch that man, I'm actually going to be showing more love for that man than I show for God. I'm going to be showing myself not to care for God like I should, because I should be someone who is wanting to go and serve God and worship God. I won't be able to serve God if I were to do that. I could see a modern day similar things, examples that some people might make today. What if someone has a car broke down alongside the road and you're on your way to church service, and by the way, you might already be running late. You're wanting to get there in time to be able to worship God. Which is better, to go and worship God or to stop and help someone who's in distress alongside the road? See, I don't think Jesus Christ picks the Levite, who was also one of the tribe that the priest came from, not necessarily a priest, but he's of the tribe the priests come from, and they had certain things that they were supposed to do, not temple worship, but they had certain abilities they had to do as well for God's people. But I believe Jesus picked those two on purpose. You're going to see why in a few moments with the verses that I picked out to go along with it. But no doubt every Jew who saw that, who heard that parable, were going to be able to sit and realize what is a good reason why the priest didn't stop, and perhaps even the Levite. A very good reason, and you can make an argument, a very better thing to do is to worship God, to serve God, than to help someone alongside the road. And I believe that Jesus is saying, no, it isn't. And here's why. Go with me, if you would, to Matthew 5, 23 and 24. Matthew chapter 5, 23 and 24. Jesus Christ is going to describe someone who is right at the point of doing worship. He is bringing his gift to the altar. It sounds as if he's talking about the idea of sacrificing an animal on the altar. And we recognize, of course, that was one way of worshiping God. And in verses 23 and 24 of Matthew chapter 5, Jesus says something very strange to someone who might think that worshiping God is much more important than anything else you can do on this earth. Look at what he says in verses 23 and 24. So if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go first, be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. Well, which one is more important, God? Serving you, worshiping you, or taking care of a problem between my brother? I think Jesus Christ just pointed out which one should be done first. Why? You know, that is a fair question. Why would you take care of a problem between a brother before you're taking care of a problem or a situation that needs to be done by law between you and your God? Why would that be more important? Let me show you. Go to Matthew 25. Matthew 25. Because to God, they are one and the same. That's why it's more important. Matthew chapter 25, 34 through 40. This is another parable. And Jesus Christ is telling his listeners what it's going to be like on Judgment Day. On Judgment Day, people, they're going to be separated on his right hand and his left hand. To those on the right hand, he's going to say these words. He's going to tell them that how they had served him, and his response is going to show you what he had said to them. Look at verses 34 through 40. Then the king will say to those on his right, I'm sorry, he tells them that in 34 through 40. Then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you for the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. And I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. Then the righteous will answer him. Now, I love their answer. Lord, if I would have saw you in any of these trouble, I certainly would have done it. But Lord, tell me when it was. I didn't remember doing these things for you. Look, listen to what they said. Then the righteous will answer him saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, and thirsty and give you a drink? And when did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and visit you? And the king will answer them, truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me. You see why Jesus is able to say, if you have a problem with your brother, go and take care of it? Because when you have a problem with your brother, you've got a problem with God. Because when you take care of a problem with your brother, you've taken care of a problem with God. So it isn't the idea that you are doing something lesser when you should be glorifying God and serving God. No, you are glorifying and serving God when you take care of a problem that is in your midst, which is exactly what the Levite and the priest should have done. Their duty to God was to serve others for God because they were God's chosen people. They were Jews. That was their duty. Under the new covenant, we are God's chosen people. So helping and serving other people is our duty for God. And I didn't read those next verses that follow after that, but he says to those on his left, you didn't do those things for me. And they said, when did we ever see that with you? And his response is, when you didn't do it for those you came across who needed you. That's when you didn't do it for me. They would have certainly done it if they ever saw Jesus Christ on the side of the road, or naked, or hurt, or hungry. They would have done it for him because they wanted to serve God. And he's saying, you didn't serve me because you didn't do it. Finally, 1 John chapter 4. John just puts it bluntly here. Any question whatsoever of loving God is put in its place if there is no other love. Look at what he says in 19 through 21. 1 John chapter 4, 19 through 21. We love because he first loved us. God showed us how to do it. So what does that mean? Verse 20, if anyone says, I love God and hates his brother, he is a liar. For he who does not love his brother whom he has seen cannot love God whom he has seen. And this commandment we have from him, whoever loves God must love his brother. That one phrase, if someone says they love God and hates his brother, he's a liar. Why? Because to serve God, you serve your brother. To love God means to love your brother. There is no difference. That's why that phrase now, if you can understand why I said what sounds like a blasphemous thing at the beginning of this point. Love him as you love your Lord. Because in loving him, you are loving your Lord. By not loving him, you are not loving your Lord. The priest and the Levite showed no love for God. Even if, and I believe it is true why Jesus picked those two, even though it would seem they were trying to be able to continue to serve God as they were obligated to do. How to love our neighbor. God's people, his chosen, comes with huge responsibility. It means being godly. That's what it means. And we need to be careful about whether or not we recognize, about whether or not we're being godly. When we react to others, the way we treat others, the way we live around others. I guess basically it comes down to, are you going to be like the Levite, the priest, or the Samaritan? Song we're going to be singing for the invitation is number 37. If you want to use your songbooks, it's going to be up on the screen as well. Angry Words. I love this song because of the chorus. The chorus makes it clear. You know, a lot of times, I spoke a little bit earlier, we had a wonderful men's meeting. I love the fact that we're able to discuss without having any difficulties in bringing up touchy matters. We're able to discuss. And I think that shows maturity to be able to do that. That's wonderful. This song talks about the reason it needs to happen. And the reason that, and I'm not just talking about in men's meetings, I'm talking about in Christian gatherings, I'm talking about in anything we do with or without our brethren. As this parable showed a few moments ago, it all needs to be done with love. If you're like me, I've sang this song many times in the past. But as this happens to be one song that I love the words to, not just the tune. A lot of times I like a song because I love the tune. But I love the words to this song. If you haven't thought about the words in the stanzas of this song much lately, listen to the words like we're supposed to. If anyone this evening needs the purpose of your sins being forgiven, let us know. Let us know in any way that we can help you as we stand and sing.